Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the aromatic, slightly chaotic, and surprisingly influential world of early coffeehouse culture. Picture this, it's the 16th or 17th century. You're wandering through a bustling city, perhaps Cairo or London, and you catch a whiff of something new, something invigorating. It's not the familiar stench of unwashed bodies or the comforting aroma of baking bread. This is different. This is the scent of roasted beans, ground and brewed into a dark, mysterious liquid. People are huddled inside dimly lit establishments, not just drinking, but talking, arguing, plotting, and generally being far too awake for the time of night. You, my friend, with your delicate 21st century sensibilities, would probably be overwhelmed by the noise, the smoke, and the sheer intensity of it all. You probably won't survive this without at least one existential crisis about personal space. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you tuning in from and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins with those mysterious beans themselves. Unlike tea, which has a long and well-documented history in Asia, the origins of coffee are a little murkier, shrouded in legend and whispered tales. The most popular story, and one you've likely heard, involves a goat herder in Ethiopia named Kaldi. Legend has it that his goats became unusually energetic after nibbling on the berries of a certain shrub. Intrigued, Kaldi tried the berries himself and experienced a similar invigorating effect. Whether this is entirely true or a charming piece of folklore is something historians still argue whether. What we do know is that by the 15th century, coffee cultivation and consumption were taking root in Yemen. It wasn't yet the global behemoth it is today, more of a regional curiosity with perhaps a slightly suspicious air about it. Imagine encountering this dark brew for the first time. It's bitter, it's potent, and it definitely wakes you up. It's a far cry from the sugary lattes and flavored concoctions we know now. Back then, it was raw, untamed energy in a cup, and it was about to embark on a journey that would change the social and intellectual landscape of the world. From the highlands of Ethiopia and the Arabian Peninsula, our mysterious beans began their slow but steady march outwards. Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, became an early point of contact. As coffeehouses, known as kavakhane, started to appear, they weren't universally welcomed. Imagine the scene. These new establishments are drawing crowds. People are staying up late, engaging in lively discussions, some of which might even be critical of local customs or authorities. For some religious leaders, this was cause for concern. Was this new beverage an intoxicant forbidden by religious law? The debate raged. There were attempts to suppress coffee consumption, with some even going so far as to order the closure of these newfangled coffee houses. Can you imagine being told you couldn't have your daily caffeine fix? The outrage? However, these early attempts at prohibition were largely unsuccessful. The appeal of coffee, that jolt of alertness, and the social spaces it fostered, proved too strong. Think about it. Before coffee houses, where did people from different walks of life gather so freely? Taverns existed, of course, but they often revolved around alcohol, which came with its own set of social issues. Coffee houses offered something different, a place for conversation, for sharing ideas without the inevitable slurring of speech and questionable decision-making that often accompanies too much ale. One quirky tidbit from this period is that some believed coffee had medicinal properties, capable of curing everything from indigestion to melancholy. Historians still argue whether these early endorsements were genuine beliefs or clever marketing. Regardless, the association with alertness and clarity certainly didn't hurt coffee's growing popularity. So, while Mecca initially eyed these brewing beans with suspicion, it ultimately couldn't resist their allure. The genie, or rather the bean, was out of the bag. Moving north from Mecca, the aroma of roasting coffee beans soon wafted through the bustling streets of Cairo. Here, in this vibrant hub of trade and culture, coffee houses began to take a firmer hold. Picture the scene. You step into one of these early Cairene establishments. The air is thick with the fragrant steam of brewing coffee, mingled with the scent of spices and perhaps a hint of tobacco. People from all walks of life are gathered here. Merchants discussing their latest deals, scholars debating philosophical points, and everyday citizens catching up on the local gossip. These weren't just places to grab a quick caffeine hit. They were social epicenters. One mainstream historical fact is that Cairo, as a major urban center in the Islamic world, played a crucial role in the dissemination of new ideas and goods. Coffee, being one of them, found fertile ground here. Historians still argue whether the rapid adoption of coffee in Cairo was primarily due to its stimulating effects or the social spaces it created. Perhaps it was a combination of both. Imagine the novelty of it all. A place where you could not only enjoy this intriguing new beverage, but also engage in conversation and exchange information. It was a far cry from the more traditional and often more segregated social gatherings. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some coffee houses even became known for storytelling and musical performances, transforming them into early forms of entertainment venues. You could sip your coffee while listening to epic tales or the soothing sounds of a lute. Not a bad way to spend an afternoon, right? So, Cairo embraced coffee, and in doing so, it helped to solidify its place as more than just a passing fad. From the vibrant chaos of Cairo, the influence of coffee, and the burgeoning coffee house culture continued its northward trajectory into the vast and powerful Ottoman Empire. Imagine the grand cities of Constantinople, Damascus, and beyond, slowly succumbing to the allure of this dark brew. Initially, much like in Mecca, there was some resistance. Concerns were raised about its potential intoxicating effects, and there were periods where coffee and coffee houses faced opposition. Some religious and political authorities viewed these places as potential breeding grounds for dissent and idle chatter. Can you picture the Sultan's advisors debating the merits and dangers of this new social phenomenon? However, the Ottoman Empire, with its sophisticated urban life and vibrant intellectual scene, ultimately embraced coffee with gusto. Coffee houses, known as kavahain, sprang up across the empire, becoming integral parts of social life. One mainstream historical fact is that the Ottomans developed elaborate rituals around coffee preparation and consumption, a tradition that continues in various forms to this day. Think of the finely ground beans, the slow brewing in special pots, and the delicate serving in small, handleless cups. It was more than just a drink. It was a social ceremony. A quirky tidbit from this era is that in some parts of the Ottoman Empire, failing to provide a guest with proper coffee could be considered a serious social faux pas. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on ritual was primarily about hospitality or a way to further integrate coffee into the cultural fabric. Regardless, the Ottomans certainly left their mark on the way coffee was perceived and enjoyed. The empire's embrace helped to solidify coffee's status as a beverage of sophistication and social interaction. While the aroma of roasting coffee beans was becoming increasingly familiar in the East, Europe remained largely in the dark about this intriguing beverage. Imagine the surprise of European travelers and merchants as they encountered this dark, energizing drink during their journeys to the Ottoman Empire and beyond. For centuries, Europeans had their own established drinks: wine, beer, and various herbal infusions. This bitter, black liquid was something entirely new, and initially it wasn't always met with enthusiasm. Some described it with suspicion, even fear, calling it the bitter invention of Satan. You can almost picture the raised eyebrows and skeptical expressions as they took their first tentative sips. One mainstream historical fact is that the 17th century marked the gradual introduction of coffee to Europe. Travelers brought back tales of these bustling coffee houses in the East, and slowly the beans themselves began to arrive on European shores. Initially, coffee was often sold as a medicinal curiosity in apothecaries. Imagine your local pharmacist trying to convince you that this strange, dark powder would cure your ailments. A quirky tidbit from this period is that there were various religious debates in Europe about whether coffee was an infidel drink. Some Catholic clergy initially viewed it with suspicion due to its association with the Ottoman Empire. Historians still argue whether these religious objections significantly hindered coffee's early adoption in Europe or merely added to its exotic mystique. Regardless, the allure of something new and potentially invigorating eventually won out. The seeds of Europe's coffee obsession had been sown. As coffee beans and tales of Eastern coffee houses trickled into Europe, it was in England, particularly London, that the beverage truly found a vibrant home. Imagine the bustling streets of 17th century London, a city teeming with merchants, writers, and all manner of characters. Amidst the taverns and alehouses, a new kind of establishment began to appear: the coffee house. These weren't just places to grab a drink. They quickly evolved into social and intellectual hubs, quite unlike anything England had seen before. One mainstream historical fact is that London's first coffee house is believed to have opened in the mid-17th century. Soon after, they multiplied rapidly. Picture these spaces, often crowded and smoky, filled with the lively chatter of men from various walks of life. You might find a merchant discussing trade, a writer scribbling notes, or a group of gentlemen debating the latest political pamphlet. A quirky tidbit from this era is that some coffee houses developed very specific clienteles. You might have a coffee house that was frequented mainly by lawyers, another by merchants involved in a particular trade, and yet another that became a haunt for artists and writers. It was almost like having specialized social clubs, all centered around the humble cup of coffee. Historians still argue whether the rapid growth of London's coffee houses was primarily driven by the novelty of the drink itself or the unique social spaces they fostered. Whatever the reason, these penny universities, as they would later be known, were buzzing with activity and ideas. These London coffee houses weren't just places for casual socializing. They became fertile ground for intellectual exchange, playing a significant role in what we now know as the Enlightenment. Imagine stepping into one of these establishments. The air is thick with the aroma of coffee and the murmur of conversation. You might overhear discussions on philosophy, science, politics, and the latest news. Think of it as a pre-internet information superhighway, all fueled by caffeine. One mainstream historical fact is that many important intellectual and scientific ideas were debated and disseminated within the walls of these coffee houses. Thinkers like Isaac Newton and members of the Royal Society were known to frequent them. Historians still argue whether the informal atmosphere of the coffee house actually fostered more open and innovative thinking compared to the more rigid academic settings of the time. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some coffee houses even served as early forms of postal services. For a small fee, you could often have your mail delivered to or from a particular coffee house, especially if you knew the recipient frequented that spot. It's a far cry from our digital inboxes, isn't it? These buzzing hubs of conversation and caffeine were truly instrumental in shaping the intellectual landscape of the era. They were places where ideas could brew just as strongly as the coffee itself. The nickname penny universities gives you a real sense of the accessibility of these early coffee houses. For the price of a penny, the cost of a cup of coffee, you could enter a world of conversation, debate, and access to information that might otherwise have been restricted to the wealthy or the scholarly elite. Imagine that, for a single penny, you could sit alongside merchants, writers, lawyers, and even the occasional nobleman, all engaging in lively discussion. It was a remarkably egalitarian space for its time. One mainstream historical fact is that the affordability of coffee houses contributed significantly to their popularity and their role as centers of social interaction across different social strata. Historians still argue whether this social mixing truly broke down rigid class barriers or simply provided a temporary space for different groups to interact. Regardless, the accessibility was a key factor in their success. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some coffee houses even had designated seating areas for different types of patrons, though the lines weren't always strictly enforced. You might find a corner favored by poets or a table dominated by businessmen. It's almost like different chat rooms in a physical space. This blend of affordability and diverse patronage made the coffee house a truly unique and influential institution in early modern Europe. Beyond their role as intellectual and social hubs, the London coffee houses also became surprisingly intertwined with the world of commerce and early finance. Imagine these bustling establishments not just filled with talk of philosophy and poetry, but also the murmur of deals being struck and the exchange of commercial information. For merchants and traders, the coffee house offered a convenient and informal place to meet, negotiate, and stay informed about the latest market news. One mainstream historical fact is that Lloyd's of London, the famous insurance market, had its origins in Edward Lloyd's coffee house. Picture it, ship owners, merchants, and underwriters gathering to discuss maritime risks, eventually leading to the formalization of insurance practices. Historians still argue whether the informal setting of the coffee house was crucial to the early development of these financial institutions, or simply a convenient location. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some coffee houses even served as unofficial clearinghouses for debts. You might find someone settling an account over a cup of coffee, a far cry from the complex financial transactions of today. The easy access to information and the concentration of individuals involved in trade made the coffee house a surprisingly fertile ground for the growth of early commercial and financial activities. For the writers, poets, and journalists of the time, the coffee house was more than just a place to get a caffeine fix. It was a vital part of their professional and social lives. Imagine these literary figures gathering in their favorite coffee houses, sharing drafts of their work, debating literary merits, and exchanging the latest gossip. These spaces became informal salons, where ideas could be tested and refined in the heat of conversation. One mainstream historical fact is that many literary and journalistic endeavors had their roots in the London coffee houses. Think of the early newspapers and pamphlets that were often discussed and even written within their walls. Historians still argue whether the stimulating environment of the coffee house directly fueled literary creativity or simply provided a convenient meeting place for writers. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some coffee houses had specific poets' corners or tables where literary types would congregate. You might find a budding playwright nervously reading his latest verses to a small circle of fellow writers, hoping for feedback. These coffee houses truly were the literary lairs and gossip mills of their day, playing a crucial role in the development of English literature and journalism. The influence of coffee and the coffee house culture it spawned wasn't confined to Europe. Imagine the spread of these aromatic beans across the globe, carried by trade and colonial expansion. From the Americas to Asia, coffee took root, often adapting to local customs and environments. While the bustling, intellectual atmosphere of the London coffee house might not have been replicated everywhere, the social aspect of sharing a cup of coffee certainly traveled. One mainstream historical fact is that coffee cultivation became a major industry in many parts of the world, often with significant social and economic consequences. Think of the vast coffee plantations that emerged in places like Brazil and the Caribbean. Historians still argue about the long-term impact of this global spread, particularly concerning labor practices and colonial economies. A quirky tidbit from this period is that in some early American coffee houses, political discussions could get quite heated, sometimes even leading to minor brawls. It seems the stimulating effects of coffee could occasionally fuel more than just intellectual debate. So, while the European coffee house had its unique character, the humble coffee bean continued its journey, influencing social interactions and economies far beyond the shores of Europe. Let's take a moment to appreciate the rituals that developed around the simple act of enjoying a cup of coffee in these early coffee houses. Imagine it. It wasn't just about gulping down a caffeine hit. There was often a social etiquette involved, a way of interacting within these spaces. Think about the sharing of news, the polite debates, the quiet contemplation over a steaming cup. These weren't just transactions. They were social interactions, woven around the communal experience of coffee. One mainstream historical fact is that different regions and even individual coffee houses often developed their own customs regarding how coffee was served and consumed. Consider the Ottoman tradition of serving coffee with Turkish delight, or the European habit of adding sugar and milk. Historians still argue whether these rituals were consciously developed to enhance the social experience, or simply evolved organically. A quirky tidbit is that in some early coffee houses, you might find patrons using small silver spoons not just for stirring, but also for testing the thickness and quality of the brew. It was a more tactile and perhaps more considered experience than our modern grab-and-go culture. These rituals, however small, contributed to the unique atmosphere and social fabric of the early coffee house. Think about the journey of the coffee itself, from the bean to the cup in those early days. It wasn't the instant pre-ground convenience we often know today. Imagine the process. The roasting of the green beans, often done in small batches over an open flame, filling the air with that rich, intoxicating aroma. Then, the grinding, perhaps by hand, with a mortar and pestle, releasing even more of the fragrant oils. Finally, the brewing, often done simply by boiling the grounds in water. It was a more involved, more sensory experience. One mainstream historical fact is that the methods of preparing coffee varied greatly depending on the region and the available technology. Consider the difference between Turkish coffee, with its fine grounds and unfiltered presentation, and the coarser brews found in some early European establishments. Historians still argue about the extent to which the preparation method influenced the social experience of drinking coffee. A quirky tidbit is that some early coffee grinders were quite ornate, almost works of art in themselves, reflecting the growing appreciation for the beverage. This more hands-on approach to preparing and enjoying coffee likely contributed to the slower pace and more communal feel of the early coffee houses, a stark contrast to our often hurried consumption today. As our journey through the world of early coffee house culture draws to a close, let's reflect on its lasting legacy. Imagine the echoes of those lively conversations, the clinking of cups, the exchange of ideas that once filled these spaces. While the specific form of the 17th and 18th century coffeehouse might have evolved, its underlying spirit, a place for social connection, the sharing of information, and perhaps a little mental stimulation, continues to resonate in the cafes and coffee shops we frequent today. One mainstream historical fact is that the early coffee houses laid the groundwork for many of the social and commercial institutions we now take for granted. From newspapers to insurance markets, historians still debate which of their many functions was the most significant in shaping the modern world. A quirky tidbit to leave you with. Some historians suggest that the shift from beer to coffee as a common morning beverage in places like England may have even contributed to increased productivity and a more alert populace. Whether that's true or not, it's certainly a thought to ponder as you sip your morning brew. The early coffee houses, in their own unique and sometimes chaotic way, left an indelible mark on society, fostering connections and fueling the flow of ideas that continue to shape our world. Now, let your mind drift back to those dimly lit rooms, filled with the murmur of voices and the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Picture the scene softening, the edges blurring, the lively debates fade into a gentle hum. Feel the warmth of the cup in your hands, even if you don't have one now. Imagine the comforting weight of the history we've explored tonight, settling around you like a soft blanket. The stories of those early coffee houses, those hubs of connection and caffeine-fueled conversations, are now a part of your own quiet thoughts. Let the gentle rhythm of your breathing deepen. Allow the images to gently dissolve. Thank you so much. Sweet dreams.